Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex biological systems to get at the concepts you really need to know.
Today we're tackling a fundamental logistics problem.
A huge one. How any large animal manages the constant, non-negotiable task of exchange with its environment. We are talking about circulation and gas exchange.
Right. It's the ultimate delivery service. You have this massive body made of trillions of cells, and every single one needs oxygen, needs nutrients, and needs its waste taken away.
And if you're something simple, like a flatworm, you can just rely on diffusion across your skin.
But the second you get any kind of thickness, you hit a hard wall, a physical limit.
And that wall is the speed of diffusion. It's wild how quickly it breaks down. A substance might diffuse 100 micrometers in a second.
Which is nothing, a microscopic distance.
But to go just 1 centimeter, that same substance would take almost 3 hours.
3 hours. It just doesn't work. And that physical constraint, that's the evolutionary pressure that forced these complex systems into being.
So the mission is to build machinery, a fluid, some pipes, a pump, that can beat that clock and connect the outside world to every last cell.
Exactly. So we're going to explore the systems that move blood and, the specialized surfaces like gills and lungs that actually load it up with oxygen.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the two basic system designs. The first split in the evolutionary road.
So nature basically came up with two main solutions. First, you've got the open circulatory system.
Right, you see this in things like insects, arthropods, some mollusks.
Yep. And in this system, the circulatory fluid, which we call hemolymph, is also the same fluid bathing the cells, the interstitial fluid.
So it's all just one big fluid bath.
Pretty much. The heart pumps this hemolymph into open spaces, sinuses, and exchange happens directly with the tissues. It's a lower pressure system.
And that lower pressure can be used for other things, can't it? I remember reading that spiders use that hydrostatic pressure to actually extend their legs.
They do. It's a clever, low-energy, multi-purpose solution. But the trade-off is, well, lower pressure and less control over where the fluid goes.
Which leads to the alternative.
The closed circulatory system. This is what you see in annelids, cephalopods, and, of course, all vertebrates. Us. Here, the fluid, now we call it blood, is confined entirely within vessels. It's always separate from the interstitial fluid.
And that confinement lets you really crank up the pressure.
Exactly. Much higher pressures, which means more vigorous flow and precise control over where that blood is directed. It powers more active lifestyle.
Okay, so speaking of that high pressure system, let's trace the basic anatomy. The cardiovascular system. We have three main types of vessels.
And their names are all defined by the direction of blood flow relative to the heart. That's the key thing to remember.
So arteries always carry blood away from the heart.
Always. They're thick, they're elastic, they have to be to handle that pressure. They then branch into smaller arterioles,
which feed into the capillary beds.
And the capillaries, they're the real business end of the system. That's the site of exchange. They're microscopic. Then the flow collects again.
Into tiny venules, which then merge into the larger veins that carry blood back to the heart.
And even within vertebrates, you can see this evolutionary progression. Take fish and sharks, for example. They have what's called single circulation.
Just one loop.
One loop. A two-chambered heart one, atrium, one ventricle. The ventricle pumps blood once, pushes it through the gills to get oxygen.
And
then that same blood, without going back to the heart, continues on through the rest of the body's capillaries before it finally returns.
But wait, if the whole point is high pressure, that sounds like a huge problem. Pushing blood through the tiny mesh of gill capillaries must just kill its momentum.
It does, massively. The blood pressure drops substantially in the gills, which means the flow to the rest of the body is, well, pretty sluggish.
Okay, for a fish, maybe, but not for...
Not for an endotherm, not for birds and mammals. We use about 10 times more energy than a similar-sized reptile. We needed a fix.
And that fix was double circulation.
The two-pump system. You separate the work. One side of the heart, the right side, powers the pulmonary circuit. It just pumps oxygen-core blood to the lungs.
It's a short trip.
A very short trip. Then that oxygen-rich blood comes back to the other side of the heart, the left side, which then powers the systemic circuit.
So it gets a second push.
A second, much more powerful push. The heart repressurizes the blood after gas exchange. That's the genius of it. It guarantees strong, high-pressure flow to the entire body.
Which brings us to the mammalian four-chambered heart. Two upper chambers, the atria, that receive blood.
And two lower, much more muscular chambers, the ventricles, that do the pumping.
Okay, let's trace the path. Oxygen-poor blood comes back from the body.
Through the vena cava into the right atrium, Then it flows down into the right ventricle.
And the right ventricle pumps it out to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries.
And you'll notice that the wall of the right ventricle is thinner. It doesn't need to be that strong. It's just pumping next door to the lungs.
Then, after picking up oxygen, the blood comes back to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins.
From there, it flows into the powerhouse of the heart, the left ventricle.
And its wall is way thicker.
2 or 3 times thicker. It has to be. It generates the enormous force needed to push blood to your brain, your toes, everywhere else, the entire systemic circuit.
This whole sequence is the cardiac cycle.
Right. Systole is the contraction phase when the chambers are pumping. Diastole is the relaxation phase when they're filling up.
And the amount of blood pumped per minute is the cardiac output.
Which, for a resting person, is amazingly about 5 liters a minute. Your entire blood volume.
Wow. And make sure blood only goes one way, you have valves.
4 of them. The AV valves between atria and ventricles and the semilunar valves where blood exits the ventricles, their closing makes those 2 heart sounds, the lubbed up.
But the truly amazing part is the electrical control. The heart beats on its own.
It does. The rhythm is set by the sinoatrial node, or SA node, the little patch of tissue in the right atrium, the natural pacemaker.
It sends out an electrical impulse.
And that impulse spreads across both atria, causing them to contract, but then the signal hits a roadblock.
The atrioventricular node, the AV node. And here's what's so interesting. The system deliberately introduces a delay. Why would you want to slow things down?
It's a brilliant piece of timing. That 1/10 of a second delay is just long enough to let the ventricles fill completely with blood from the atria.
Ah, so they're fully loaded before they fire.
Exactly. Without that delay, you'd be pumping a half-empty chamber. It would be incredibly inefficient. After the delay, the signal zips down through the ventricle walls and triggers that powerful, coordinated contraction.
Okay, so the pump is incredible, but let's talk about the plumbing. Here's where it gets really interesting. The relationship between the vessels, the pressure, and the speed of the blood.
So we said arteries are thick and elastic to handle the pressure. Capillaries are the opposite. They're just endothelium and a thin membrane, perfect for diffusion. And veins are thinner-walled with valves inside.
But the part that seems totally counterintuitive is the velocity. Blood is screaming fast in the aorta, but when it gets to the capillaries, it slows to a crawl by like 500 times. Why? The capillaries are the narrowest pipes.
It's all about the total cross-sectional area. Think of it like a river. The aorta is the main fast-flowing channel, but the capillary beds, that's like the river spreading out into a massive, miles-wide wetland.
Oh, I see. So even though each individual path is tiny.
The sum of all those paths together is enormous. There are about 7 billion capillaries in a human. Their total combined area is vastly greater than the aorta's, so the flow has to slow down.
Which gives the cells time for exchange.
That's the whole point. And that flow is driven by the pressure wave. The peak pressure during contraction is the systolic pressure, about 120.
And the lower pressure, when the ventricles relax, is the diastolic pressure, maybe 70 or 80.
And it doesn't drop to 0 because the elastic walls of the arteries recoil, which keeps pushing the blood forward.
The body is constantly fine-tuning this, isn't it? With vasoconstriction and vasodilation.
Constantly. Arterioles can narrow or widen to direct blood flow. And a key molecule here is nitric oxide, NO. It's a major vasodilator. It relaxes the vessels. On the other hand, things like endothelin are potent vasoconstrictors.
This control is so important when you're fighting gravity. I mean, think about a giraffe.
The pressure needed to get blood all the way up that neck is immense. Or even just for us, the fainting response. If your brain senses a pressure drop, the system basically triggers a shutdown to get your head level with your heart. It's a safety reflex.
And what about getting blood back up from your legs? The pressure is pretty low by then?
Very low. That's where the veins need help. They have one-way valves, and they rely on the contraction of your skeletal muscles as you move. Walking, for example, literally squeezes the blood back up your legs toward your heart.
Okay, one last piece of the plumbing before we get to the gas. The fluid recovery system, you said a lot of fluid leaks out of the capillaries.
A huge amount. 4 to 8 liters every single day.
Where does it go?
It becomes lymph. And it's collected by a whole separate network of vessels, the lymphatic system. This system eventually returns all that fluid back to the blood.
And along the way, it gets filtered through the lymph nodes.
Which are packed with white blood cells. That's why when you have an infection, your lymph nodes swell up. It's your immune cells multiplying to fight it.
Got it. Now let's look at the blood itself. What is it made of?
It's about 55% liquid matrix, the plasma, and 45% cells.
And plasma is mostly water.
Mostly water, but with critical salts, ions, and a whole bunch of proteins. Albumins for osmotic balance, immunoglobulins, which are antibodies, and fibrinogen for clotting.
And of the cells, the main ones are the red blood cells, the erythrocytes.
By far, their structure is just perfectly adapted for their job. They're biconcave discs, which increases surface area for diffusion.
And they don't have a nucleus
Right.
or mitochondria.
That's the amazing part. They don't use any of the oxygen they carry because they only make ATP anaerobically. They're just bags of hemoglobin.
And if that hemoglobin is faulty, like in sickle cell disease, things go very wrong.
Terribly wrong. The protein clumps together, deforms the cell, blocks vessels, and the cells only last about 20 days. It causes a cascade of problems.
And when a vessel is damaged, the body needs to plug the leak. That's the clotting cascade.
Right, which is a classic positive feedback loop. A break exposes proteins, which attracts platelets. The platelets get sticky and release factors that start an enzyme cascade.
Which eventually activates thrombin.
Thrombin is the key enzyme. Its job is to convert the soluble protein fibrinogen into insoluble fibrin threads. These threads form a mesh that traps blood cells and forms the clot.
But sometimes that system can cause problems, which leads to cardiovascular disease.
Right. Like atherosclerosis, the hardening of arteries from fatty deposits, or plaque. And this is where we hear a lot about cholesterol.
LDL and HDL.
Exactly. You can think of LDL as the delivery truck, dropping off cholesterol at cells. HDL is the cleanup crew, taking excess cholesterol back to the liver. A high ratio of LDL to HDL is a major risk factor for plaque.
And if that plaque or a clot that forms on it blocks an artery in the heart.
That's a heart attack, a myocardial infarction. If it happens in the brain, it's a stroke.
Okay, so that's the delivery system. Now let's pivot to the cargo, how we get gas into the blood in the first place.
The fundamental principle here is partial pressure. Gases only ever move from a region of higher partial pressure to one of lower partial pressure. That's the only rule.
And it's a much harder job in water than in air.
So much harder. Water has about 30 times less oxygen, and it's way more dense and viscous, so aquatic animals evolve these incredibly efficient gills.
And the key to their efficiency is ventilation, moving water over them, but also something called countercurrent exchange.
This is a beautiful piece of engineering. In fish gills, the blood flows through the capillaries in the opposite direction to the water flowing over them.
So as the blood flows along, it's always meeting water that has a slightly higher oxygen concentration than it does.
Exactly. The partial pressure gradient is maintained across the entire length of the capillary. It never equalizes. This allows them to pull over 80% of the O2 out of the water. Just amazing efficiency.
Terrestrial insects, though, they went a totally different way.
A completely different way. The tracheal system. It's a network of air tubes, the tracheae, that branch throughout the entire body, bringing air directly to the cells.
And the most important thing here is that this system is totally separate from their circulatory system.
Right. This allows for incredibly high metabolic rates, like for flight, without needing the circulatory fluid to transport the oxygen.
Which brings us to mammals and our lungs.
Which are basically internal infoldings. Air comes down the trachea, splits into the bronchi, then smaller bronchioles, and finally ends up in millions of tiny air sacs, the alveoli.
But the alveoli are the exchange surface, a huge surface area, about 100 square meters.
But that surface has to be moist for diffusion to work, and that moisture creates surface tension, which wants to make the alveoli collapse.
To fight that, cells produce surfactant.
A mix of phospholipids and proteins that acts like a detergent to break that surface tension. The discovery of its importance was a huge medical breakthrough, especially for premature babies.
And how we actually breathe is also specialized. We use negative pressure breathing.
We don't push air in, we pull it in. The diaphragm, a big sheet of muscle at the bottom of the chest, contracts and moves down.
That increases the volume of the chest cavity.
Which drops the pressure inside the lungs below the atmospheric pressure outside, and air just rushes in to equalize it.
Birds are even more efficient, though.
Oh, much more. They use a system of air sacs to create a unidirectional flow of air through their lungs. They don't mix fresh air with stale air like we do. It's incredibly efficient, perfect for flight at high altitude.
And we don't even have to think about any of this. It's all on autopilot.
Controlled by the medulla oblongata in the brainstem. But here's the interesting part. What it's mainly monitoring isn't your oxygen level.
It's the CO2.
It's the CO2, or rather the effect of CO2. When CO2 dissolves in your blood and cerebrospinal fluid, it forms carbonic acid, which lowers the pH. Your brain senses that drop in pH.
And that's the trigger to breathe more.
That's the primary trigger. It tells the medulla to increase your breathing rate and depth to blow off that excess CO2 and bring your pH back to normal.
A perfect feedback loop. Okay, last big piece. How does hemoglobin actually work so well?
Well, first, these respiratory pigments are game changers. Without hemoglobin, our blood would carry maybe 4.5 milliliters of O2 per liter. With it, it carries 200.
And it has this property called cooperativity.
Yes. When one oxygen molecule binds to one part of the hemoglobin protein, it changes the protein's shape slightly.
Making it easier for the next oxygen to bind.
And the next, and the next. It's why the oxygen binding curve is S-shaped. It means hemoglobin loads up on oxygen very efficiently in the lungs where pressure is high.
But the truly clever part is how it unloads. The Bohr shift.
The Bohr shift is genius. Think about a muscle you're exercising hard. It's using up O2 and it's producing a lot of CO2.
Which lowers the pH locally.
And that lower pH caused by the CO2 actually decreases hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen. It makes hemoglobin let go of its oxygen more easily.
So it dumps more oxygen right where the cells are screaming for it.
It's like a biological GPS for oxygen delivery. It's incredible.
And most of that CO2 gets transported back to the lungs not as a gas, but as a bicarbonate ion dissolved in the plasma.
A much safer and more efficient way to carry it. And you see these incredible adaptations all over. Deep-diving mammals like Weddell seals can hold their breath for an hour.
Wow.
They store huge amounts of oxygen in their muscles using a protein called myoglobin. And when they dive, they slow their heart rate way down and only send blood to the absolute essential organs, like the brain and heart. They ration it.
What an amazing system. From the physics of diffusion forcing the issue, to the different designs of pumps and pipes, the electrical timing of the heart, the mechanics of gills and lungs.
And the precise chemistry of the Bohr shift. It's also tightly coordinated.
It really is. And it makes you think, you mentioned the insect tracheal system, how it delivers oxygen directly, bypassing circulation.
Right. Very direct, very efficient for small things.
So if it's so efficient, why don't we see giant insects anymore? The kind you hear about from the Paleozoic era.
And you've brought us right back to the beginning.
Back to the problem of diffusion.
Exactly. While the tracheal system is great for small bodies, it doesn't scale up. For a giant insect, the tubes would have to be so long and so wide to get oxygen deep into the body that it becomes unworkable. You run headfirst right back into that same physical speed limit we started with, the slow, unyielding pace of simple diffusion over distance.
A truly full circle moment. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.